Hi everybody, welcome to Tidalwave Studio. My name is Damiani and today I would like to invite you on a studio tour, walk you through all the rooms, show you all the custom built studio furniture and of course a lot of gear. Let's dive in. Alright, let's start with the recording room, one of the most important parts of a recording studio obviously. It is very important that the room you track all your music in really sounds great. So I put a lot of effort in designing, planning and working on this room. First of all, the shape and the size of the room. I tried to make it as large and as high as the house allowed me to do so. So we have like a height of over 4 meters and around 45 to 50 square meters of surface area. And then almost all surfaces are irregular. So the roof is like this, the walls are also as little parallel as possible. There are only 2 walls that are really parallel in this room and they gave me a little resonance around 220 Hertz, and that's why I built this giant 400 kilo diffuser that you can see in the back. The diffuser has been designed with a special tool where I was able to put in the frequency that I really wanted to target and also all the other frequencies that can be scattered with that diffuser. So it is highly effective and it broke that resonance in the room completely. Below the big diffuser there is also a large extra absorber. As you can see, there are a lot of different types of diffusers in this room. That's because I tried to see how I could get out the most diffusion for my money and the time that I put in. So the big diffuser in the back was quite expensive and a lot of time to build, but the ones on the ceiling here I made like a negative form so I could build lots of identical diffusers within a short time. Here on top of the control room window I have a design of diffuser that didn't need any screws or any glue to hold them together. So I designed something that you could just stick parts together to form diffusers, which is actually pretty cool. And when I was experimenting with diffusers, I thought, why not make one out of glass? So I could put it in front of a window without the sunlight being blocked. Speaking of the recording room window, I really don't like this aquarium view that you often see in recording studios, where you have like a pretty small window and hardly any like visual or almost physical contact to the artist on the other side. I really wanted it to be as large as possible so that the artist has a little bit the feeling that we are in the same room when we are working together. And the window consists of 2 really thick pieces of glass that are angled one towards the other, just to eliminate some resonance in between, and they are aimed at the ceiling. So if the sound hits the window, it's deflected to the ceiling and not directly back at a microphone, for example. Besides all the diffusers, I also have a couple of absorbers. Some are on the walls and I have 4 on wheels so that I can move them around and put them around a singer, for example, just to make the room a little bit smaller. So I can either have like a reflective surface or a completely absorbent surface. So this is a really nice thing to have, like a variable acoustics. So I have these movable absorbers, and then on top I have a big curtain covering one complete wall of the recording room that can be removed so that the room is really very reverberant and not so dry anymore. Alright, here in the recording room I also keep all my microphones in different cabinets. There's just one microphone that is always standing around here looking at us, and that's this guy here. You may wonder, what is this? Well, I made a complete video how I built this, because one of my big passions is woodworking, as you will see in the other parts of the studio. And I made a video how I built this guy and also what it sounds like and what it exactly does. So I will link to these videos here. Alright, no good recordings without good microphones, right? So I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite microphones and why I like them. This must be one of my most favorite. This is a AEA R44 ribbon microphone. So this is a faithful reproduction of the original RCA 44. It sounds so smooth and buttery. So whenever I have something harsh, maybe like a trumpet or like a vocal that is a little bit abrasive with a normal microphone, I will pull out this one and it sounds super, super sweet. Speaking of ribbon microphones, this is also one of my all-time favorites. I bought this a couple years ago from a gentleman who owned this microphone since the 1960s, and he hadn't used it since then. And it has been built in the 1940s, so I don't know where it has been between the 40s and the 60s, but since the 60s it hadn't been used except from me later on. It also sounds very, very sweet, and it has an incredible low end. For example, putting it in front of a bass drum or like a single microphone on a drum kit, this is really, really golden. Okay, as you can see, I really, really love ribbon microphones, and a couple years ago when I was browsing eBay looking for ribbon microphones, I found one guy from Russia back then who was building microphones himself, and he had examples on eBay, like sound examples that I really liked, and I wanted to buy some of them, and they were incredibly cheap. It was like 200 euros or something for a pair of microphones. So, and they came in this kind of packaging. So it's just like a piece of foam that is usually used to insulate copper tubes or something. But it's actually a really nice way to protect these microphones. Look at them. They're really beautiful. I have two different kinds. I bought two different pairs. So this is the older version, this is the newer version, and it's a little bit like an Royal 121 or something like this. They sound really, really, really supernatural, and they were really cheap. So the packaging is really special, but also the shock mounts. Look at this. These have been handmade and they look kind of cheap, but they work really, really well. So you can just stick in the microphone here, and there you go, a nice shock mount that's working incredibly well. My favorite non-ribbon microphone must be this tube microphone. It's a Perlman TM1. I have a pair of them. They are hand-built in USA, and they are a little bit like a U47. It's supposed to be in that kind of sonic aesthetics. So they sound very thick, very warm, never really abrasive, glamorously great sounding microphone. A couple years ago, there was a back then new company called Aston from UK that came out with a bunch of microphones, and I bought all of their microphones. I really love them. They are pretty inexpensive, but sound really, really great. They really compare to much, much more expensive microphones. This is the Aston Spirit. I have used it on countless records, on vocals, on guitars. I use this all the time when I'm recording acoustic guitar, for example. I've used it on upright bass. I've used it on cello, on violins, on pretty much anything you can think of, and it always performs really, really well, and it's really not expensive. You have to check out that brand. Okay, here is another tube microphone that I really love. It's a Telefunken M16 Mark II. It sounds a little bit brighter than the Perlman TM1, so when I have a source that is really too dark, then I like to pull this one out just to give it a little bit of natural sparkle without having to use any EQ. A while ago, when I was still browsing eBay for microphones or studio gear, I found somebody who was selling measurement microphones with Omni capsule. And I really love Omni capsules because they just capture low frequency really, really nicely and sound very naturally overall. So I bought these two tube measure microphones from Neumann. They are not supposed to be used for recordings, but really just to measure acoustics or measure speakers or whatever. But they sound amazingly great on instrument recordings. We've had a look at one condenser microphone from this brand called Aston, and here is one of their dynamic microphones. It's the Aston Stealth, which comes with 3 different sound patterns. No, 4 different sound patterns. So like 2 different voice patterns and one special for guitars and one that is a little bit darker sounding. I always use this on a floor tom if I have the space to put it in. It's a really great sounding microphone. And now a little special tip at the end. These are dynamic microphones. You certainly have heard of the biodynamic M201, which is widely used on snare, on toms. It's very appreciated among recording folks. But there is one very, very similar microphone from Biodynamic. It's the M420N. That's this one. And if you compare the size, it's almost just half the size. And I use this all the time on snare because, first of all, it sounds as great as this one. It just sounds more open than, for example, in SM57. It sounds very natural. And this, because it's so small, it's very easy to just sneak it in between toms and hi-hats and stuff. You always find a spot for this on a snare instead of having like a larger microphone than this. Okay, I have a couple more microphones, but these are my absolute favorites. Alright, before we move on to the next room, I would like to show you a couple pieces of gear that live here in the recording room. One of which is this guitar cabinet that I built. I also made a complete video about how it works and why I did it and how it sounds. I really love unique pieces of gear that you cannot find anywhere else, and if they don't exist, you have to make them. So this is one of these unique builds that I made just to see how far I can push an idea that I have in my mind. If you want to know more about it, check out this video here. Okay, here is another one. This is an old harmonium that I bought for like 50 euro on a flea market. I saw it, I heard it, and I really, really loved it. And I've used it on a lot of records meanwhile. Really nice in acoustic environments to add like a foundation, like a warm, paddy sound behind, let's say, acoustic guitars, for example. Listen to this. And yes, the squeaking of the pedals gives it the extra character. And here is another instrument that I really, really love. It's my old Hammond T500. I mainly use it to create like organic, warm, paddy sounds, as you can hear, for example, right here. Well, back when I built the studio, I had a little bit of space left here in the corner, and I decided to build like a little ISO booth or vocal booth or something. Well, small rooms like these, they don't sound very pretty, so I hardly ever use it. Maybe sometimes when I'm recording drums in the main room that I put a singer in there to make a scratch vocal or something like this. And what I also do is I store my plate reverb that I built a couple years ago in there. Alright, before we move on to the control room with all the nice gear and custom built furniture, I want to show you a couple impressions of the kitchen, the lounge and the outdoor area where musicians can enjoy a snack or relax a little bit in between of takes. And by the way, if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos about music production tips and mixing decompositions. We have a weekly music production podcast where we answer your questions. So all the good stuff is on this channel. So subscribe, and if you want, leave me a comment to let me know what you think of our little studio tour here. Okay, let's move on. All right, so now we're in the control room, the heart of the studio. This is where I spend 6 days a week either mixing or recording artists that are in the recording room. And in this room, I put also a lot of effort planning-wise. So to try and make this room as, first of all, comfortable as possible, and also acoustically as optimal as possible. So for example, the shape of the room is made in a way that there are as little parallels as possible. It's not really easy to avoid all of them, but for example, the ceiling is angled, the walls behind the speakers are angled, the big window to the recording room is angled, and basically all surfaces are somewhat treated. I don't have diffusion going on in this room, except maybe the small diffuser in the back. But here there are a lot of absorbers. They are from a company called ACM in Munich, which make really high-end acoustic modules. In the back here, half of the complete wall is a giant bass trap, and there are 2 more bass traps on the sides. And then we have a lot of absorbers on the ceiling and all the walls basically. So there are absorbers on all direct reflection points in here. The room has been measured and it is next to flat. No room is really perfect, but I tried to make it as perfect as I possibly could. Almost all of the furniture in here is handmade and custom built. So I'm a hobby woodworker and I had big pleasure in designing my own furniture so that it exactly fits my needs. I would like to start with the desk that I'm using here. I used to have like a large controller before. In the beginning, the controller was right in front of me and I had the screen to the side, but I was always like sitting towards the screen and had to look to the right to look at the artist in the recording room, so that was not optimal. Then I decided to get rid completely of a big controller and instead only use like a small 8 fader controller, which is more than enough for me at least. This desk here is designed in a way to be as small as possible. Why did I do this? Well, I don't want any big reflections from the desk. This is always a problem. So the speakers are pointing at you, but you'll get direct sound and you also get a ton of reflection from the desk. And by minimizing the footprint of this desk, I basically avoid a lot of reflections. I measured the before and after, and the difference is huge. So I can't get any smaller than this because I need to, use my mouse and have a screen and stuff. So if I somehow could, I would get rid of a desk completely and just have only speakers with nothing in between me and it's, but that's not practically really doable. So this is the best solution I came up with. What I also did with this desk is I tried to integrate all the cabling inside. I want it to be as tidy and clean as possible. I don't like having cables hanging around everywhere. So I designed it in a way that all the cables that come to the monitor controller, this preamp here and the screen and the way out back to the speakers, that everything is located in the foot of this desk so that everything looks clean when you look from the outside. Monitor controller, I use Heritage Audio RAM. First of all, it's a really nice unit, but it has one feature that I really like, and this is you can just connect via Bluetooth. So how often do you know that artists want to show you a reference or want to show you a song or something, and then it's like, how am I going to do this? Send me the file, or you need an aux cable or something. But here say, okay, just connect to the Bluetooth and we can listen via the speakers of the studio instead of having to handle around with cables. That's really convenient, and on top it really sounds nice, so that's a win-win. Here on the desk also I have my favorite preamp, which is an Aurora Stinger. The guy who built these Aurora preamps is Geoff Tanner. He's one of the main engineers who worked at Neve and designed the 1073. So this is basically his take on the 1073, like a little bit more modern version. I really love it, and I use this like 90% of the time when I'm using when I'm recording individual signals, so like a voice or one guitar or a bass or whatever. So I use this all the time and it sounds phenomenal. And then the next piece of gear that is right in front of me, which is like almost the most important part, except maybe the room itself, these are the speakers. I started like in '99 with the obvious pair like a Genelec 1031 with the NS10s, the classic combo. Then I switched to Adam S3A. Then I had like different hi-fi brands and I tried everything, but I was never really happy. And then at some point, a befriended mastering engineer was approached by the manufacturer of speakers, and they had this low mid speaker that had the feature of having very little distortion and a very smooth frequency response that required no harsh high cut in the crossover, so that you could get a very natural sound without having like a heavy crossover. And then for many months we worked on developing our own speaker basically, and I built my custom pair for myself because I really love wood and I love woodworking. So I built these speakers myself for my personal use. I have them now for 15 years, and I couldn't be happier than I am with this setup here. I may have mentioned this, but having a cozy atmosphere for me is much more important than all the technical stuff. Obviously, I really want top-notch equipment and acoustics and everything, but that for me is like a given. You can buy it, so you should buy it and get good stuff. But the atmosphere that you have in a room when you are a musician and come into a room, I think that plays a big role. And I hear that artists are very happy to record here because they like the atmosphere. It's so chill and it's really cozy. So I try not to put the technical aspects in the foreground. For example, I don't have all the microphones displayed all the time, and I don't have like a huge amount of gear standing around. In fact, 1 or 2 years ago, I sold a lot of stuff that I hardly ever used. This rack here, well, it was not that rack, but I had a rack that was 3 times the size if you count rack space, and it was full of stuff that I hardly ever used. So what I did is I removed everything that I do not use on a daily basis, and I built like a little bit smaller rack and have everything like within the reach of my hands, so that I really just have what I really need and don't have like an excess of technical stuff sitting around here, just like distracting from the coziness of the room. But I still have a couple of nice pieces of gear, and I think it's time to walk you through what I have in my racks here, what it is and why I love it. Let's dive in here. Okay, let's start with the console here in the rack. This is a console from 1986 from former Eastern Germany. It is a broadcast console. And the way I got it is really funny, because I was looking for preamps of this brand because I already own one pair. I really love the sound. They sound really amazing. And I was looking for more. And then the guy who was selling preamps, he said to me, give me a call, let's talk about this. And then we talked for a while, and then he said, I don't think that you need 1 or 2 preamps, you need a complete desk. And I said, yeah, that's funny, but how am I supposed to get one? All these consoles, or almost all of them, they were just taken apart and sold as individual modules, because there was probably easier to sell that way. And he said, well, I still have 3 of them. And he was willing to sell me one. So I was there the next day buying like the base unit with 8 inputs and then 2 subgroups. And then I liked it so much that I bought like an extension of 8 faders. So this gives me a total of, well, if I use all the tracks, like 20 preamps, and they all have a 3-band EQ, like it's usual with those broadcast consoles. You have like a bass band, which is basically a low shelf around 60. You have a high shelf around 10K. And then there is a mid band that in this I think it's around 3K, if I remember correctly. So this is a really, really nice console, and I use it all the time for tracking complete bands in the recording room. All right, let's see what we have in the rack here. Here on top, I have a Bricasti M7. I'm using this reverb all the time. It's living in every mix that I make. And I most of the time have funnily set it to one setting, which is Studio A. I really love it to, just give some 3D to a signal. It's amazing. It's probably the best digital reverb that you can buy. And I have this for 15 years or so, and I use it every day. Next up is an old Bucket Brigade delay from Dynacord. It's a VRS 23. I really, really like that one. It has a very soft, mellow sound, and you go in mono and can go out stereo, so you can really get like a nice stereo delay. It's unique sounding. I really like it. Up next is Universal Audio LA610, which has the 610 preamp. It's a tube preamp from Universal Audio. It's a very legendary preamp. Sounds really nice. And then we have an optical compressor, which has this T4 opto cell that also is used in the LA2A. It's not the same compressor, but it has a similar behavior and is really really nice on vocals, for example. Okay, the next is a rack with two modules from West Germany, broadcast console from Telefunke. This is the V676B. It's a preamp that can make 76 dB of gain, which is awesome, especially for dynamic microphones and ribbon microphones. And then we have the W695 EQ, which again, similar as in the console on top, is like a 3-band EQ with a low shelf, a high shelf, and a selectable mid-band. And here at the bottom I have an old Yamaha reverb. It's the Rev 5. It's a pretty inexpensive reverb nowadays, at least, but it sounds awesome. So if you are in the market for like a hardware reverb, maybe for live use or whatever, or for the rehearsal room, and you want a really good quality reverb for little money, give it this a go. Rev 5 by Yamaha. All right, here on top on the right side, first of all I have a tuner from Korg. It doesn't sound like a really fancy piece of gear, but it's very, very convenient. So when I'm tracking bass or guitars here in the control room, the musicians don't have to plug in a tuner or something, because I just route the signal through to this tuner and they don't need to unplug or switch or anything. The tuner is always in action, which is really convenient. Okay, next there is a 2-channel Neve 1073. I don't think that we have to spend a lot of words on this. It's an absolute classic. Then again, a couple of broadcast modules, this time from Neumann. Here there are two V476 preamps. They also have 76 dB of gain, which again is great for dynamic microphones or ribbon microphones, and they are very clean sounding. Those broadcast modules were produced to very, very high standards, and it was said that one such a module cost a monthly income of a normal worker back then. So these are from the, from the 70s, I think. I have a couple of modules, they are still from the 60s, so there was a lot of money back then, so really like a month's salary worth on one module. I fortunately was able to buy them like almost 20 years ago when prices were very, very low. I think I paid €400 for the two preamps and this EQ. Speaking of the EQ, this is the Neumann PEA, which is like a mastering EQ. Today it's worth really a lot, and I know why, because it really sounds so sweet. Whatever you do with analog EQs like these, you almost cannot fuck up a signal. Even if I boost like the bass by 12 dB and the highs by 12 dB, it really never sounds bad. It may be a little bit too much bass, but it doesn't get boomy, it never gets harsh. It's really like so sweet sounding equipment. It's well worth whatever money you spend on stuff like this. By the way, between all those racked pieces of gear, I made some wooden spacers which are vented. I used some grill cloth that you could use on a guitar amp, so they are basically open, so if there is a little bit of heat generated inside, that this heat has somewhere to escape through. Okay, next up is a pair of Telefunken V672, again broadcast modules. This is basically the transistor version of the V72, the legendary tube preamp. So this is like the version they built after the tube version, and it also sounds very thick and creamy and always very expensive if you want. Next up is very important for such a rack, and this is the patch bay. I chose to use TT patch bay, so tiny telephone. They are called that way because back in the old days when you were making a phone call, there was a lady most of the time somewhere patching incoming calls to whoever you wanted to call to, and it's the same format of connectors, so that's the way they are called this way. So you can get a lot of connections in a very, very small space, and all my gear is connected here, so whenever I want to go from one preamp into an EQ, into a compressor, or whatever, I can patch all the gear in front of here conveniently without having to crawl back in the rack and switch cables back there. By the way, I keep the cables stored on top besides the console, so I don't have cables lying around. So now here on the bottom, probably the most important piece of gear, this is my Funk Logic palindrometer. Actually, it's just a rack space filler from Funk Logic. They look funny, and I wanted to have one of these for ages, and a couple months ago one popped up on eBay and I bought it, and now it's my most beautiful rack space filler. Okay, let's move to the little side rack here. By the way, this is also, like all the other furniture, custom built. This one is from American Walnut. That's a really lovely wood to work with. Okay, what do we have in here? This is basically almost completely my master chain rack, with the exception of 2 EQs. Some of these pieces are living on every mix that I make. I'll go right through them and show you what we have in here. On top here, we have a pair of Tegeler Myth EQs. Those are very new from a German company called Tegeler. And funny enough, I won these at a giveaway. I have never won anything in my life except my very first guitar that actually brought me into music when I was 14 or 15. So this time again, I was very lucky to win something, and it's a lovely pair of EQs. They are, for my taste, very, very, very transparent. So I can hardly detect any like harmonic distortion when I'm using them, and they have very gentle slope. So it's really a great EQ for gently boosting or reducing a certain frequency range. So no notching or something like this, but very gentle EQing. Really nice EQs. Next up is a real classic, the API 2500. This is a compressor that is always living on my master bus, like 99% of the time. Sometimes I will use it on drums maybe, or on individual tracks while tracking, but that's very, very rare. So most of the time it's just sitting on the mix bus. Next up is a pair of Chandler limited germanium compressors. These are real tone beasts. Even if the compressor is doing nothing, these units already have a sound. I guess they are adding some harmonics due to transformers and these germanium transistors that are inside. They just color the sound in a very, very nice way. everything sounds a little bit thicker and richer when you run it through. And these are also always sitting on my mix bus. I don't use them for anything else except on the mix bus. Next up is a pair of Telefunken ANT EQs. It's W695B. They have 3 bands, and you can get pretty surgical with these. I almost always use these on toms. They are really great. They sound super fat, and they are perfect for removing a little bit of boxiness and putting in a lot of low end, for example, on floor tom to get a really fat, thick sound. And then on the bottom here, there's a pair of Chandler Limited tone control EQs. Unfortunately, they are not built anymore. That's a real shame because they are really, really lovely. You have like a passive section which works quite a bit like a Pultec EQ. So you can boost and cut the same frequency at the same time. And it's like the old Pultec trick. You boost an area and remove the areas around the boosted area by also cutting the same frequency at the same time. That's really wonderful, for example, on bass drum and on bass guitar. But I also use this like 99% of the time on my mix bus. It's like boosting a little at 110 and boosting like 20K a tiny little bit. You have really like very sweet high end. So boosting these 20K by 1 or 2 dB just opens up a whole mix in a very lovely way. Here on the side in the shelf, I have some of the copies of the records I made. In fact, I have like 3 big boxes full of CDs that the artist sent me when the production was over and the CDs were pressed. But I don't want to keep like a bazillion CDs here, so I just have like a little collection of the CDs I made here. Let's have a look at the back of the rack. I also try to keep my cabling clean and as tidy as possible, although it's really not easy with cables coming from everywhere and going everywhere. But this is the best I could come up with without having like a million cables running around here. The rack has like doors that you can open and close to access the back of the racks, and everything is kept inside so that, yeah, we don't have to look at a ton of cables. And then next to me here is my good old AKG BX20 spring reverb. It's big as a fridge and sounds absolutely amazing. I also made a video once where I compared this to the plugin emulation from UAD if you want to have a look at this. On top here I have a stereo pair of split amps that is made by the same brand as the console here made, RFZ, from former Eastern Germany. It's just basically used to run a signal through. You can split it, yes, but you can just run it through to just use the transformer sound and thicken up a sound and give it some analog mojo. Behind this door, I have the computer and the Pro Tools HDX system that is actually now running on an M4 Mini Mac. These little computers are so fast now, so I have like an HDX card in an external chassis and my UAD cards in external expansion chassis, and the actual computer running the plugins and stuff is a Mac Mini M4. A little look over here. Here I have my favorite pair of headphones. It's a Biodynamic 900 Pro X sitting on yet another custom-built little piece of wood that I turned just to keep my headphones stored properly. And here I have an old little M-Box that is just the preamp for my talkback microphone when I'm speaking to artists in the recording room. Okay, there's another little rack with some nice pieces of gear here. Here on top we have a Revox reel tape machine. This is the one with 15 inch per second reel tape, so this is higher quality than the ones that run at a slower speed. So this is the high speed version. Really nice sounding machine. Sometimes I used it like as a plugin, just playing in some music and recording it right after the read had, and re-recorded it into Pro Tools and just used it for a little bit of tape saturation. Down here there is a nice little mixer from a company called Gaitine. They are more famous for building really nice monitors, so studio speakers. But they also made this little mixer, and I found it on eBay like, I don't know, 20 years ago, and I bought it, and sometimes I use it just to maybe mix keyboards from like 4 pairs of keyboards to 1 pair of outputs. Down here is another little tape machine. Sometimes I get tapes to play them into Pro Tools, and this one runs at a slower speed than this one, so this is a nice alternative if I need to play back a tape that has been recorded at a slower speed. Over here is a really nice tube preamp. Funny is that when I bought it, I found this on eBay and it was advertised as a guitar amp. But when I saw it, I was sure that it was not a guitar amp. So this is from the 60s. And it's a tube preamp, so you can plug in 4 microphones or basses or guitars or whatever. It has been fitted to receive a jack plug, so I actually really like to use it on bass because you can drive the input a little bit and get some nice tube saturation. And it's really funny that the guy who sold it thought it was a guitar amp because he was running the output through a 4x12 guitar cabinet, and it actually works. I tried it just for fun, and you could really use it as a guitar amp. Obviously not as loud as a really powerful guitar amp, but still it could work. And then here I have a little Dynacord Echo Chord tape echo. I don't use that stuff very often because, yeah, out of convenience, we're using plugins most of the time. But here are 2 old tape echoes just in case I want to play around with them. All right, that was it. That was a little visit through Tidalwave Studio. I hope you enjoyed all the little details. It was fun to show you everything. I really hope you liked it. Thanks for watching. And hey, if you enjoyed this and if you like the atmosphere of the studio, make sure to check out all the other content of this channel. And yeah, subscribe and leave me a little comment. It means a lot to me. Thank you and see you in another video. Bye bye.